In 1962, the United States of America is a nation beset by profound, far-reaching illnesses. There's not one rod, but many, of whose symptoms point in all directions, and thus may warrant all sorts of cures. These illnesses are endemic conflict between states, between races leading the government and those below it, between classes, the fit and unfit, and between the ever-dynamic battlefield of partisan politics. Whether the solution is to further divide between North and South, free the economy, or entrench its cartels, snip the bud of divergence with sterilization or worse, or throw it all away and start from scratch, the illness persists. And with time, its symptoms grow worse, and as American cities burn with fear and hatred, so too do the hearts of its people. But who is to blame for this? Partisans point to the loss of Hopkins to Dewey, or if they veer to the extreme, the licking of that Taft received from General Eisenhower. This miasma is a dominant symptom felt throughout America, an ailment that no one discusses, only acknowledges with tired eyes and hesitant nods. Yes, there's sickness, but nothing near the surefire terminality of German Nazism or the persistent infection of Japanese nationalism. Theirs would kill first, and America would remain free and beautiful, pure and righteous. The sickness continues. Despite the exuberance brought by nearly 2 decades of peace, the fever slowly raises America's temperature. Like a dog in the summer, America pants, eyes grow hazy, and headaches and chills rack the body. Something must be done lest this summer cold become a chronic disease. A dog in the summer, a dog boat in the summer. I'm Mr. Dogboat 333, which is who I am. Welcome back to Development Diary 30 for the New Order, Last Days of Europe. This is part 3 of 4 of the Yippie series of Development Diaries. The last couple, we read about the lore going on in the timeline, going over the new bits of lore. Last video specifically was about, I believe it was the Eisenhower, Kefauver administrations, as well as the 1960 election, which culminated in a very familiar sight to TNO fans, but in a very different sort of way. Richard Nixon being elected president of the United States, and JFK becoming vice president, all through a contested election. So, this is where we stand right now. This wasn't supposed to happen. A government split in 2 halves. The newcomer, President Nixon, saddled with incumbent Vice President Kennedy. The U.S. enters the 60s, the decade of decision, confused. Is a nation mired with conflict, tensions boiling over, a recalcitrant South, and increasingly beyond lobbying against racial equality, and a public on the verge of madness. Is this what the country deserves? 1 year into his presidency, Nixon is no closer to an answer. So, this is going to be the new starting conditions for TNO America. I think we looked over this a little bit in the last video as a little teaser of what is to come. So starting off, we have old Dick Nixon himself. He's given the fighter. We get faction monthly points 5. I think I know what this is reading into it, but I'm not 100%. But hey, what are you gonna do? So the ideology is split into 3. We have conservatism, which are Republicans, independents, which I'm guessing is here, liberal conservatism, and Democrats, which are just liberalism. Let's take a look at what old Dick Nixon has to say. Richard Nixon is an animal. He spent his entire life in dogged pursuit of power, of prestige, of importance. He told himself from an earlier age that he was better than the bleak mediocrity of Whittier and the petty humiliations his father offered. He just had to fight for it, to rip, tear, and maul. It was this quality that facilitated his mediocre rise, first defeating an entrenched Democratic incumbent during an anti-Republican wave election, then destroying enemy radicals via the House Un-American Activities Committee, then seizing a seat in the U.S. Senate. When Ed Martin declined to make Nixon his running mate in 52 over rumors of corruption and bribery, many thought it would be Nixon. Instead, the creature learned a new trick, transforming from an anti-radical crusader to a good government reformer. In 1954, he ran the governorship of California and spent 6 unhappy years combating disorder while being forced to work for the Democratic legislature. In 1960, amid growing dissatisfaction with President Kefauver, Republicans finally turned to Nixon to do what he did best: destroy the opposition. Instead, he came short, his position on civil rights too ambiguous to appease Southern segregationists or black leaders. Staring down a contingent election, he tucked his tail between his legs and negotiated a humiliating peace that saw him surrender his running mate, half his cabinet, and his supposed principles for the presidency. But now, Nixon's licked his wounds. He has vowed to never be made weak again. Not even his most committed enemies realize how far the president is willing to go to make good on that promise. But that doesn't leave out the fact that sitting next to his side is John Kennedy. Pundits like to say that Kennedy's everything that Nixon is not. Eloquent where Nixon is curt. Open where Nixon is closed. Liberal while Nixon is conservative. This is a recent invention. 4 years ago, no one would have thought to compare the two men. 4 years ago, they would have compared Kennedy with President Kefauver, the listless Tennessee Democrat that Kennedy attached himself to balance the ticket and facilitate his own political rise. They would have noticed how Kefauver seemed to be abusing his naive vice president, draining his father's vast fortunes for campaigns, while forcing Kennedy into the unpleasant role of solving civil rights by himself. But Kennedy is his own man, not merely a photo negative of the commander-in-chief. He's made the best of a situation and breaks his world as a black candidate, selling out Kefauver to keep his vice presidency. None of this has changed his relentless drive, his bottomless ego. Even as he smiles with Nixon for the cameras, JFK is plotting to seize the throne for himself come 64. He might do it too, provided his name, reputation, and liberal bona fides stay intact. We also have two starting national spirits. We have New World mentality and institutionalized idiosyncrasy. Did we read this last time? I don't think we did, so we'll go ahead and do that. America's always styled itself as a haven of the free, a shining light of liberty, an ocean away from the old world, where anyone is welcome. Anyone with a dream and the will to achieve it is welcome. Regardless of how accurate the idea is, there's no denying that the American dream is a cornerstone of what America is. And in these modern times, with America beset on both East and West by fascist totalitarianism, liberty has never felt more threatened or more crucial. Americans today are imbued with fervent nationalism, a will, a need, to defend that shining city on a hill, which they call home from all foreign threats, and to spread the light of freedom to those beleaguered souls that cry out for it most. So, all this really seems to be, it talks about the economy compared to its sphere, and talks about the inflation rate. I wonder if the American sphere ends up growing, different modifiers will hop on, or possibly worsen. I'm not sure yet. Meanwhile, we also have institutional idiosyncrasy. So Democrats gain monthly popularity, and the establishment gained 5 of these little shields. I'm guessing that's strength, if I had to guess. Meanwhile, Republicans gained 0.3% popularity monthly, and the traditional Republicans gained 10 of these shields monthly. So I'm guessing this has to do with the more or less status quo of both the Democratic and Republican parties. We'll have to wait and see. As we go through the Dev Diary, maybe even wait until the update or further updates from Dev Diaries or leaks. But here we are. For the last century and counting, the same dynamic has dominated American politics. Republicans spar with Democrats, the voters decide whose vision they like more, and America continues on its upward trajectory. What happens then when that upward trajectory stalls out? When the people wounded by their failure in World War II grow tired of a failed status quo? The answer is voter apathy, disillusionment, and the pressure of America's many past sins coming back to haunt it. For this robust system to maintain its footing on shaky ground, the politicians must prove to the American people that their system really does still work, to save their jobs if nothing else. Well, that is that, so let's move on. The circumstances of Nixon's first term forced a political rebirth. His aggressive style that earned him such ire among the Democrats and admiration among his own Republican base was not what the country needed. He was an illegitimate president, housed to power, break away Southern delegates in a contingent election. His victory was not his own. He had not won the majority of the electoral vote nor the popular vote. Against his own urges, compromise was thrust upon him, and he was losing himself. Robbed of victory in his own right, Nixon additionally would have to give a government in his own name, working with Kennedy to forge a compromise cabinet capable of working with a Democrat-dominated Congress. This Nixon-Kennedy administration will be composed of Republicans, tolerable to ancient Democratic rule, and installations from the VP's own circle. Nixon could reject this compromise and attempt to rule outright, but Nixon needed the Democrats' mandate. After all, a solid Republican voting bloc paired with conservative Democrats could fashion a majority in both houses of Congress. So these are the ministers we start off with. We have the foreign guy, Secretary of State in this case, Economic Minister, Secretary of Treasury, and Defense guy, Secretary of Defense. I forget the names off the top of my head for the default positions, but this is who they are in TNO. Starting off, for Secretary of State, we have Earl Warren. Now, in our timeline, he was Governor of California, a VP candidate for Dewey in 1948 against Truman, and he ended up becoming a Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, actually. A lot of the major court rulings during this time, Brown v. Board, Miranda, all of them are largely held up due to the Warren courts. Republican, but a pretty liberal Republican at that, as long as you ignore the internment camps, which that wasn't a exclusively him thing, so don't give him exclusive shit for it. Do give him shit, but not exclusive shit. Sergeant Shriver was a relative of the Kennedys. He ended up being McGovern's vice presidential candidate after Thomas Eagleton ended up dropping out. And Bob McNamara, Secretary of Defense through JFK and I believe LBJ as well. Not the best guy. And Dino, he was originally the 72 Democrat candidate in old TNO, like start lore. Democrat or Republican, I forget. The original lore, very old time. In our timeline, he figured out a scientific way to figure out how to send draft people there. One of the things that he sent very low IQ people. The regarded, if you will. That's the old medical term for not regarded, obviously. That's my way of getting past the censors. McNamara's morons, they called them, sent very low IQ people to fight in Vietnam, and they died at very, very high rates. Not necessarily fun guys, but let's see what they're doing in TNO timeline. For Earl Warren, he's an odd man out in Washington. Once the widely popular governor of California, Warren has outlived his political half-life, with a board of campaigns for the Republican nomination dashed by his liberal reputation and the GOP's increasingly conservative tilt. Once retired from public life, Warren is settled in the nation's capital as head of his own private law firm, away from the front lines of party politics. Respected by men of both parties as a capable, fair-minded, and fundamentally decent man, his nomination as Secretary of State has come at the pleasant surprise in Washington, a sign of the Nixon administration's willingness to compromise in the face of partisan rancor. Yet there are those who doubt Richard Nixon's honest intentions, chief among them Warren himself, who has increasingly found himself at odds with the president and his assertive foreign policy vision. Warren can only hope that he will be able to leave the Nixon administration with his sterling reputation intact. Interesting. Next up we have Shriver. The quintessential coastal establishment liberal, Sergeant Shriver is renowned as a bold problem solver, a die-hard idealist, and the strongest ally the Kennedys have in the White House as a Secretary of Treasury. He's intelligent, a people-pleaser, and hopeful to a fault. Born in 1915 and married to a Kennedy himself, Sergeant Shriver takes endless pride in spearheading numerous policies focused on addressing poverty and America's relationship with other democratic nations abroad. In spite of all this, he remains in President Nixon's good books. He seems to like Shriver based on his competency, though neither would admit to that. To Shriver, Nixon is a disreputable sort of bastard who would stop at nothing for what he wants, but at least he listens. To Nixon, at least Shriver's no Eastern establishment banker. And then we got Bob I can't say his name right. McNamara. Ego and politics are not exactly a rare combination. Washington is filled with men of confidence, of high self-esteem, and high promises. What is rare is ego and competence. And it is in that instance exceptional mixture that Robert McNamara, what? McNamara was a whiz kid, Air Force World War II veteran who became high-ranking executives of the Ford Motor Company. However, among this great group, McNamara was greater still, using his intelligence and experience not only just radically reform and improve Ford on all accounts, but rise a corporate ladder to become company president. It is the same man that drew Nixon and JFK to the man. The same competence that he has brought to the role of Secretary of Defense. To both the President and Vice President, McNamara is a man with supreme confidence and self-assurance, and someone with the skills to back him up, making him a favorite of the pair. Well, here we are with the ministers. And yet this arrangement has its readily apparent flaws. There's no telling who was really working in Washington, as next to nothing in the way of bills was truly getting done. By the standards of Republican ideologues, Nixon was shaping up to be a dud. Liberal feels about Nixon could re-examine the country's main alliances were reportedly put to rest by the intervention of Secretary of State Earl Warren. Fears of a new deal being undone and incapacity were neutralized by Kennedy's own brother-in-law, Secretary of Treasury Sergeant Shriver. Nixon appeals were reduced to platitudes. Agriculture is important. Our rivers are full of fish. You cannot have freedom without liberty. Our future lies ahead. Here's the start of Focus Tree. You might get some flashbacks to how TNO has its own started Focus Tree for Nixon. Looks like we have a lot of hemispheric defense working in South America. Here we have giving aid to the Filipinos, helping out Cuba, putting investments into, I'm guessing, Norway and Iceland and the Faroes, possibly getting the British as well. The outside bet, I'm guessing, is Russia. Here we have, I believe, civil rights / working with JFK. Peace and prosperity, we have a stable state, we have economy stuff, and then poverty and research stuff, it looks like. And we start off with the state of our more perfect union. Fun stuff. Nixon's presidency became continuation not of Dewey but Roosevelt, Eisenhower, and the same pussyfooted leadership for that Nixon raged so hard against a year prior. The image of weakness, compromise, and stagnation was a prison for the president, who felt the country changing beneath his feet, and increasingly leaving behind. Nixon's career began in Congress under Dewey. He fought for his party during his exile from executive powers. It languished under leaders without a vision until his 1960 run. If Nixon failed, this would not be the Republicans doing it. It would be entirely on him. These thoughts weighed on the president's mind as he sat, waiting until it was time to speak at the 1962 State of the Union. When you're through, my God. It's been a hell of a thing, I can say that much. With Jack lurking behind us and that slick executive crock, we haven't got a single goddamn thing worth pointing at. The bastards in the press have been laughing their way to the bank through the whole goddamn year. No respect for the president, none at all. It's disgraceful, really, the way they read about me, not an ounce of respect. Well, if they aren't going to treat us the way they ought to, we're just going to have to go out there and prove our mettle to the people. A State of the Union address. God damn it if it isn't an uncomfortable thing, but it's the best chance I get to talk straight to the public. No spin, no Ivy Leaguer from the Times, taking what I say, turning and twisting it all around to make me look like an ass. The TV will show the truth. We're erasing the divisions here. We're bridging gaps. We're bringing this country together, even when the nuts try and take it apart, and we're going to keep doing that, whatever it takes. So we get the spin room event, and we have a little description there. Times of great adversity, we are called to shoulder one another's burdens. By transcending parochial interests and uniting as one nation, we can achieve great things that bring about progress for our society. There is not an obstacle too great when America acts as one. Well, it's a shame we're probably not going to act as one much at all coming on. And so we also have the spin room. Oh, that's a Nixon quote. Well, since I read that right. These were President Nixon's words at the State of the Union address, where he placed a specific emphasis on the importance of unity in the face of foreign aggressors. Unity, a theme which has dogged the present administration in the face of a split White House and hostile Congress. It's been a recurring point of emphasis. Goddamn bastards! The whiskey flowed fast and easy in the Oval Office, rolling over eyes and quickly filling the glass in the president's hands. He took a long sip. I told you, Bob, the press in this country is rotten. Absolutely rotten. That was as good a speech as I've gotten. Agreed, sir. Bob Handelman sat across the room, took a sip without a glass. As good a speech I've given, and they still peck at it. My God. It's what they want to hear from me, too. Bob smacked his lips. Yep, alcohol still burning his throats. The important part is that you looked strong, like you said. Right. Of course. Strong. That's the important part. The American people, they want a strong executive even if they don't want to admit it. They want to know their president has his stuff. The Republicans have his stuff and I have his stuff. Even the bastards at ABC disagree. Without further comment, the president refilled his glass. Political fatigue will decrease, and we'll comment right here. Breakthrough. A stranger in his own White House, Nixon is alone to navigate the currents of public opinion. Finding his footing, he must bend the clamps from his left to his right to influence the direction of the country. As he progresses, he will gain more methods to bend the political will surrounding him, making friends where enemies once were or severing ties with allies that weigh him down. This is where you, the player, enter. Management of these axes will be crucial when the country is thrust into crisis, domestic or foreign. Nixon, above all else, must be pillar leadership for a country that has already suffered so much just 1 year into the decade. If he finds himself an authority on the policy under discussion, he could change the national mood to fit his own. So this is the Nixon GUI. So very few initiatives will be truly in dissent. They'll fall on one side or the other. Our job is to ensure some balance, writes Elrickman to President Nixon. In all issues, foreign and domestic, balance is the key. Environmental legislation cannot come at the expense of jobs. Unions must be defeated to improve workplace safety. Aid to the poor must come with welfare reform. So we have different little segments here. Civil rights, economic policy, foreign policy, and environmentalism. I'm guessing these brackets are where Nixon falls on the issues. The X is where the American people currently are. If they're within this bracket, Nixon, I think, is able to affect the legislation that's about to go through, if I understand correctly. If I'm not mistaken, this info thing is going to explain it right now, so let's read and find out. Richard Nixon has spent his entire life striving for the presidency. To keep it, he will need to do whatever it takes to seem mainstream and respectable. And it appear a moderating influence on both the far-right kooks and the left-wing nuts. To project a sense of normalcy, even as he masks his own idiosyncratic views and personality in public. 4 core issues divide America: civil rights, economic policy, foreign policy, and environmentalism. While America contains a range of attitudes, mainstream opinion on these issues is restricted to a few, constantly shifting narrow bands. The president will need to remain within, or subtly shift, to appear a moderate figure. Failure to remain within these bands will cause the president to appear out of step with mainstream society, reducing the public's patience in the president and his national peer. Should a national crisis strike at a time when the public has lost patience in Nixon, his fair-weather friends within the establishment may decide they're better off without Dick and his friends at the helm. So we have 2 mechanics that dictate this: public patience and public dissonance. Reputation is everything. This holds particular truth to Richard Nixon, a man who has always been too cautious to make any real friends, who commands respect only so long as he can be of use to others. Even as President, Nixon is aware of how fickle the public can be. If American sense weakens, or a lack of resolve, as they did with Kefauver, they will not hesitate to inflict punishment. Richard Nixon is determined not to see that come to pass. He is determined to remain in control no matter the cost. And then we have public dissonance. The floor is shifting beneath the president's feet. Recent events are pushing sentiment in new directions beyond the president's grasp. Nixon must adapt to changing circumstances by reinventing himself or risk losing support from the public. So, we have civil rights, which I've just recognized that, all people have certain traits. Richard Nixon's attitudes on civil rights can be described as strategic ambiguity. As the 1954 Civil Rights Act marched through Congress, he declined to offer support until it became clear the law would pass. As governor of California, he neglected to intervene against anti-Asian hate crimes for fear of becoming too closely associated with the issue. As president, he's determined to be competitive in all 50 states. If that means a little moral cowardice, so be it. Next up, economic policy. We should not stop in terms of what the government can do for him. Nothing is smaller than a big businessman, says Richard Nixon to his aides, and he means it. Though conservative in his philosophy, Nixon believes that America has been failed by the Eastern Seaboard elites who guided America's post-war years. Nixon hopes to cast aside these failed men and their failed ideas. He hopes to build a new economy, one top-down and built around consensus, one defined by cheap goods and happy consumers, where Wall Street and labor exert little authority. To get his way, he'll need to boil the frog, keeping enemies so happy they don't notice the rising temperature. Interesting. Next up, we have foreign policy. A man is not finished when he's defeated. He's finished when he quits. Nixon considered himself to be a bold strategic thinker capable of altering history. He and his team of conservative intellectuals are committed to the ending of the 2 decades of humiliation heaped on it by the successful Axis. On making 1960 the start of the American century, his approach depends on mixing aggression with rapprochement, on shifting the power from the old world to the new. To realize his vision, Nixon will need to convince his fellow Americans to reforge economic ties with the Japanese Empire while strangling Germany. He'll need to find new hatreds to bury the old ones. And then environmentalism. We have to do everything that we can do to make our country lovely. Most Americans see urban smog and worsening pollution as a terrible affliction in modern society. Richard Nixon sees a dazzling opportunity. With large majorities of both parties concerned about smog, pesticides, and deforestation, a wide open space remains for any politician who can cast themselves as a friend to the environment. For Nixon, the only challenge is doing something without alienating the oil men, auto executives, and chemical manufacturers that donate to the Republican Party. What he needs is a business-friendly environmentalism, a green sheen. I think Nixon is shaping up to be maybe the most interesting T&L presidents. From my understanding, reading on, and, I should probably break loose to this. I'm gonna confess something to you all. I knew this rework was coming for a while. There were a couple leaks that got onto 4chan, and one of my, Discord, fans sent me the link, so I glanced it over. I'm not gonna share the document, because one, it's leaked information. I don't feel comfortable leaking that. I wasn't going to leak that in public to anyone. I shared it with a few friends in private. That's really about it. And 2, I don't know what long the information is going to land. That said, I get the sense here, and I think you rating on this was kind of confirmed that this stayed intact. We're going to have a little while that we're going to be here, by the way. Nixon isn't destined to be impeached anymore, it seems. Which is going to be very, very interesting to see how that ends up playing out. This might be more of the next term, by the way. Or the next doc. So I guess a bit of a spoiler alert on that end. But that's something to consider and keep in mind as we go on. But I think Nixon is going to be a very fun president to play. I think I have my eyes set on who I want to play, largely because I've been reading about him. But it's also a while before the timeline drops, or the update drops, so things might change. Leaks may come out that reveal one way or another how America's going to shape up. So we have things to think about and consider. Existing in a vacuum from the administration's broader struggle is the ever-looming fiscal responsibilities of the U.S. The budget is an annual occurrence where, subject to the economic priorities of Congress, the allocation of funds may influence a variety of existing functions. From the ability to form actions and proxies to the efficiency of past government programs, the budget is another means for you to achieve your agenda. So we have a budget right here. I'm not going to spend too much here. We have things called credits. Looks like these are where we have these little lines here where we can slot credits in, and anything within this is going to be respectable. We have a set amount of credits, it looks like. We can worry about over or under funding depending on what happens. I'm not going to spend too much time on this just because we got a lot of other stuff to come around and read about. But it looks like even at the start, we're going to have budgets and stuff to keep us more interesting. Although miscellaneous spending does refer to the space race, which is very interesting, I think. So I know they were talking about reworking the space race. And then I heard that they were going to just create a separate game or something. I don't know. TNO can kind of branch out into some crazy shit sometimes. But this makes me wonder if the space race is going to be reworked and if Germany isn't going to instantly land on the moon like they do at the very start of a timeline. I'm just speculating there. I have no idea. Anyway, onwards we go. For the time being, Nixon remains trapped by Democratic majorities, while the reality that Washington has grown accustomed to since the uncontested rule of the chamber began 30 years ago is nonetheless a barrier standing in the way of an authentically conservative agenda. So we have the Senate right here. We have both Congress and the Senate projected now times. We have different distributions of seats, and within the parties we have different spreads. We have activists, establishment, and yallers for the Democrats, and traditional New Democrats for the traditional New Republicans in the GOP. Texas, we have different distributions throughout it. The Senate as well. I'm too lazy to do the math there. This is still the year of solid South, though you're starting to see that break a little bit in places like Alabama and Kentucky. James C. Martin, Alabama. You also have distribution of Republicans and Democrats. You have traditional Republicans, activist Democrats, establishment Democrats, and New Republicans. All very interesting. I'm curious to see how it's going to play out later on. That said, there's always a way forward. No matter what you face in the chamber, cooperation can land most legislation on the desk of the president. Steering your agenda through Congress is much less about the partisans than it is the personalities of every self-important face on the Hill. Between the hopefuls or those just trying to make their place in the place of their retirement home, there'll be plenty of arms to twist to get it over the threshold. So we're going to hop up and look at this. So these are the different figures in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in the Senate, as well as the House. So I'm guessing how this is going to work. Each bill comes with a policy score. We have different distributions of activists, establishment, and yallers, as well as traditional and new. So Democrats start with a 61-39 majority. The House is more... It's about split the same way, 256 to 179, with the establishment holding strong in both, though you have a strong bit of yallers in the South, more than you do the activists. So we have different figures, at least in the Senate, as well as the House. Interestingly, emphasizes where these seats coming from. I doubt it's going to be elaborate enough that I can project district by district results. It's probably just going to do a rough number. Senate, it's been able to track pretty well, so I'm not surprised there. So let's go ahead and check out who some of these figures are. For the activist Democrats, we have Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady, under FDR in our timeline. Senate establishment, LBJ. Y'all are Democrats, we have Richard Russell. Traditional Republicans, we have Henry Cabot Jr. New Republicans, we have Barry Goldwater. As for the House activists, we have James Roosevelt. So we still have a fair bit of action from the Roosevelts here. John McCormack, as the establishment Democrats, he also stands as the Speaker of the House, starting off. Howard Smith for the other Democrats. Everett Dirksen for traditional Republicans. And Charles Halleck for New Republicans. I thought Dirksen was a Senate Majority Leader in our timeline. Let me scroll up. Well, it looks like he's still in the Congress then, because Illinois has 2 Democratic senators. That makes sense. Okay. I would spend all of my time reading this, but this video would be very, very long. I know it's kind of my shtick, isn't it? I'll read these and I'll skimp out on the event descriptions. How about that? I might end up reading those 2. We'll see how this goes. Oh, I still have that open. So, for Eleanor Roosevelt, even as a Windsor exile, Ottawa's dominated the nation's attention. There's very little Miss Elizabeth could do to take the spotlight off of America's own royalty, the Roosevelts. Despite his recusal from the election in 1940, Franklin Roosevelt's presence in the mind of all Americans, even those left of center, remained pervasive even 12 years after his death. So that means Roosevelt ended up dying in 1950, I'm guessing, if my math is correct. Yeah. Today's Senator Eleanor Roosevelt serves as the matriarch of his dynasty and the standard-bearer of his legacy left behind. Elected to receive in 1946, Roosevelt gave up her quiet life for public service, spending her time in the Senate as a leading advocate for women's issues and civil rights, topic even the more liberally inclined tread as a leper. Despite the public's admiration for her family, it often feels as if no one is truly listening to what she says. She watched powerless as Eisenhower destroyed the strongest public mandate in America in history, and the cavil for his importance restored Republican rule to the White House. Now secluded to her palace at Hyde Park, Eleanor fears what will happen when Father Time finally catches her. She wonders what she will live to see an heir to the liberalism of her and her husband, or if it will be placed in the casket beside her. Next up, we have LBJ, Jumbo himself. There's been no greater motivator in the tragic life of Lyndon Johnson than shame. Growing up amid the crushing poverty of South Texas, the bankruptcy of Samuel Johnson's farm resigned the young Lyndon to a childhood devoid of dignity. The failure of his family haunted Lyndon as he grew from teaching impoverished Mexican children to working on rural electrification programs to running for the U.S. Senate. This shame has motivated a lifelong sympathy for the poor and fueled something else entirely: ambition. Even as the second most powerful man in the country as Senate Majority Leader, Johnson still feels insecure in his station, determined to fight for a legacy that he feels is still unwritten. After all his years of service, all the skulls he's cracked for legislation that no one will remember, and even holding back the clock of democracy in his own state, Johnson is not content. Everyone knows what he's after, and only he has yet to realize he won't get it. Ouch. Next up, we got Richard Russell from Georgia. The United States is at war. As his leaders stare down the evil empires of Japan and Germany, troops are on the move. Spy agencies run interference. All this is according not in Germania or in Tokyo, but Richard Russell's humble Atlanta. And in these dark days, Russell has his work cut out for him. America's rife with divisions. These are the waxing days of the once great Southern way of life. Even as Eisenhower was drafted as candidate of the South in 1948, his presidency could only slow the clock to push back the blind-sided liberal movements, tearing the nation to shreds. But the clock continued to tick, and Southern leaders like Russell pledged themselves to massive resistance, relying on their parliamentary knowledge of America's institutions to stall the advancement of civil rights. In 1960, their gambit succeeded, deadlocking the presidential election, forcing then-candidate Nixon to kiss the ring and take political refuge in the deep pockets of the South. Even with a president that shares their interests, this war between the states is one that the South cannot win, but that's no reason not to fight. The undying legacy of men like Lee inspired Russell's generation. No matter how costly the battle, the struggles today will live on one day, inspire a future generation that may finally break the clock. Next up, we got Henry Cavill Jr. 50 years ago, Henry Cabot Lodge led a crusade against American entry into the League of Nations. He described the League as an assault on American sovereignty, an ill-gotten deal that would cripple the world's best hope and entangle her in the intrigues of Europe. He delivered a bill in the White House that severely restricted immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe, arguing that it contributed to mixing of the races. Now Cabot Lodge Jr. lives in a world his grandfather built. American sovereignty remained unfettered at the cost of millions of lives. The destruction of Europe and the rise of a Nazi empire is a permanent enemy. Immigration restrictions remained in place, condemning thousands of Eastern Europeans to suffer and die, subjugated atrocities beyond imagining. The world's best hope is now the world's last hope, standing in a world that is violent, bleak, and cruel. Some nights, Henry gazes into the night and contemplates this legacy. He considers the century of darkness in his grandfather set in motion. He thinks about his party, which feels slipping every rightward, and asks God if he's a suitable leader in this chaotic world, if he has it in him to push forward the policies that might atone for his family's sins. All he hears back is silence. Finally, we have Barry Morris Goldwater, who's never been afraid to go against the grain. Now he stands at the bleeding edge of American reaction, the vanguard of a conservative revolution. He stands heir to Robert Taft, a stalwart Republican who waged 4 lone battles against the encroachment socialism in every domestic field. Where Taft erred in his commitment to isolationism and his false belief in Fortress America, Goldwater corrects with an unwavering commitment to the struggle against tyranny, both at home and abroad. To roll back the legacies of Roosevelt and Eisenhower, to right the foibles of Dewey and the mistakes of Taft, and to restore America to what was and always shall be that shining on a hill. Barry's a man from the arid deserts and vast peaks of the Mountain West, a man of rugged individualism and self-reliance from a state that blooms beneath federally funded dams and irrigation ditches. To true believers and fervent ideologues, Goldwater gives America what has been lacking: a choice, not an echo. All very interesting figures. I think I'm gonna... I'll read the house, guys, and I'll probably just rush through the rest of these focuses. So we have some fun stuff to pop up. Once this drops, I'm gonna read all the events anyway, so what are we gonna do? I've read these all more or less off camera, so if you guys want to pause and read them, I'll do some quick breakdowns. Let's get right to the house, guys. So, for activist Democrats in Congress, we have James Roosevelt. Roosevelt's eldest son stands in his parents' shadow and shoes he cannot hope to fill. Elected in post-war Democrats, homie, thanks to his last name and wartime experience, James Roosevelt helped steer Dwight Eisenhower to the nomination, climbing the ranks of party leadership due to his family pedigree, and to a lesser extent his own political ability. There he languished caught between the ambitions of a Democrat Congress and a disengaged president as the Republican Party bounced back from the brink of electoral annihilation. Now he stands as a reminder of a bygone majority squandered by lackluster leadership, an ineffective spokesperson for the ideals his father championed, ignored by the battle-scarred liberals who organized in his absence, his position protected only by a formidable family matriarch and lingering respect for his parentage. James Roosevelt knows his days in Congress are numbered, and he has no intention of overstaying his welcome. A prince unable to live up to his family name. Pretty bleak stuff, actually. Next up, we have John McCormick, who is no Sam Rayburn, apparently. For 21 years, a soft-spoken Texan who ascended from hard-scrabble Texas country to a speakership forged a reputation as a wily tactician and expert legislator who deftly managed a broad and fractious Democratic caucus through the power of personal relationship and an aversion to open controversy. The view among the Democratic Congress, who greeted McCormick's automatic succession with little enthusiasm, was a man aloof and distant, an axe grinder of his Roman Catholicism, an unconvincing orator. A less imaginative, less sure-footed tactician, lacking the personal relationships that made Rayburn so successful. Already Congress is shifting, Southern Committee chairmen grow ever bolder, liberals even more combative, and the fissures in the party even wider. McCormack may reign, but he does not rule. And the future of the House and democracy will be decided by men more able than him. Next up, we have Howard Smith, who looks old as shit. For the Yallers. The heirs of the men who redeemed the Southland at the point of bayonets and blood-stained ballots sit in the hallowed halls of the Union. Their forefathers tried to tear asunder. Young men of talent sent to Congress to uphold the interests of Dixie's establishment, its planters, industrialists, and lawmen. It means standing for miserly education programs to ward off alien ideas, for anti-labor statutes to cast off union organizers, for states' rights to keep off the federal bureaucracy, and above all, for white supremacy. Howard Warwick Smith is one such man, a former lawyer and judge elected from plantations of Virginia's Tidewater. Judge Smith was returned to Congress year after year, rising in seniority, immersing himself in congressional procedures and processes, until he ascended to chair of the Rules Committee amid a waning liberal majority. As chairman, Judge Smith wields his legislative acumen to stall and obstruct, working the cross-party conservative coalition of Southerners and Republicans to stymie liberal proposals advanced by his nominal co-partisans. The Rules Committee, where bills are sent before advancing to the House floor, has become a graveyard, where any threat to Southern status quo is condemned to a slow death, rarely to see the light of day. Well, here come the Republicans. We have Everett Dirksen, who's seen his party go down the road of defeat. He watched it march into electoral annihilation at the hands of FDR, who in 8 short years reforged the country anew. He watched it move lockstep behind Tom Dewey, the boy attorney turned boy president, who lost Europe to Nazi tyranny and the Pacific Japanese Empire. He watched it as Robert Taft led its remains against a general with a chest of stars, but for Vermont and 18 unpledged electors, lost it all. He has seen it and survived it, helped shepherd the shattered flotsam of the party of Lincoln as it rebuilt its strength in the political wilderness. Dirksen now presides over a healthy minority, working in concert with Republican President, charting a course within the center ground. Already he sees warning signs. Restless backbenchers, newfound ideologues, a fresh generation willing to risk it all for a shot at power. Dirksen harbors no such illusions. Twice in his lifetime, he's seen Democratic presidents be offered the chance to rule like kings. As far as he's concerned, that is twice too much. Next up, and finally for the section, Charles Halleck. A relic of an era that seems to be past prime. A Midwestern Republican, a solid but not reactionary conservative, a stalwart party man who finds the grounds of American conservatism shifting beneath his feet. As part of the Midwestern troika that led the GOP in Congress, Halleck has been under growing pressure from the conservatives he sought to represent. Once thought to have the pulse of the party faithful, Halleck finds himself growing increasingly out of step with a new generation of Republicans. Right-wing ideologues from the Mountain West and Southwest, and emerging Republican cadres from the decay of the Southern South, reshaped the party's right flank, bolder, meaner, and uncompromising. As Dirksen and Forge tend to the center ground, it is up to Halleck to appease the party right. For a man who once nominated Wilkie and whipped for civil rights, it's a task that grows more challenging with every passing day. So what I can gather, the Republican Party is going to be torn by the traditionals out in the East and the more mountain conservatives out in the West, figures like Goldwater and Ronald Reagan in our timeline. Meanwhile, the South is going to be torn with the Dixiecrats and the activists, and maybe to a lesser extent the establishment Democrats who want to push forward while the Yaller Democrats hold that progress back. Very interesting. Well, each policy comes equipped with its own policy score. Senators will decide whether to vote on the bill based on their stance on the policy in hand, according to their own senator-specified policy statistics. If the bill has the support of a faction, the leader of that faction will be able to convince all senators who lack adequate assertiveness to vote for the bill, regardless of their own policy opinions. So, all these figures have different values assigned to them. So, civil rights, we have racial progressives, racial moderates, white supremacists, racial liberals, and racial conservatives. Economic policy, we have New Dealer, careful spenders, penny pinchers, and kook conservatives. Domestic policy, we have bleeding heart, personalistic, libertarian. Foreign policy, we have hubristic, Wilsonian, humble, or cold warrior. And assertiveness, we have total prick, slimy SOBs, pushovers. Interesting. Additionally, some legislation may propose amendments which could alter. It says every senator has their own unique policy score. I wonder if that's going to apply to. Does that apply to all of these senators as well? Because that's going to be interesting. Because, you know, you have your own Mavericks. Philip Hart is purported to be one in the Tino timeline. And historically, nowadays you can think of, say, historically you've had John McCain, Joe Lieberman. Nowadays you have figures like, well, formerly Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema. Now I guess Susan Collins, Murkowski, Fetterman. People who might vote against the party by themselves. That's going to be interesting if they are able to program that and keep that in there. Additionally, some legislation may propose amendments which could alter the policy score of the bill. May also change the level of support the bill has among certain factions in the House, effectively addressing two issues with one solution. So it looks like we have some economic reality acts, which you can add an amendment, for example, the Sparkman Amendment, which would make it more appealing to Democrats, which is very interesting. Looks like this is who would like the bill and who would not. Very interesting. The presidency does not command ultimate power of the political system. It's hardly the center of the political universe. Public imagination can be captured by any whiff of controversy, leaving the White House nothing more than a spectator. The case of Damien Green will have robbed all remaining attention of Nixon's administration's plan to break through. Glued intelligence said the American public have been dragged through a proceeding which saw their game shows infiltrated by a Nazi, denied his prize, arrested, and then subsequently released on ill-obtained evidence. Any warm-blooded American will oppose ought to take offense, and they do, but for cold Nixon operators like Nixon, the event presents a necessary risk. So it looks like what happens there is that, similar to other historical Supreme Court cases that didn't go well, there's a guy, Damien Green, personally, historically a Nazi, arrested, but due to ill-obtained evidence, ends up being let go. In this case, it's penned by William Douglas, who's the Associate Justice, and him getting off due to this upsets the political establishment, and Nixon decides to use this as an opportunity to impeach. Now, this is going to lead, interestingly, to the Supreme Court GUI, but we'll get there. Before he aimed at President Dewey in his Trump administration, Justice William O. Douglas had been annoyance on any task to the right of center. An outwardly political judge, he received his big break with the nomination of Chief Justice, a consolation prize for liberals and Democratic Party from Eisenhower. Since then, he hasn't been a domineering presence, if a presence at all. Every couple of months, he comes out of the wilderness to deliver the will of the liberal elite. The court is an institution untamed, with public sentiment rising against its head, and may be time to go on the offensive. Now, this is going to be interesting. So, the court, Supreme Court is going to be more expanded on and actually represented with court names. Before it was a very abstract number. You had 5 liberals. You know, you had a GUI that said, oh, you have 5 liberals, 4 conservatives. Now you have 6 conservatives, 3 liberals. It wasn't concretely expanded upon. But starting off, we have the Douglas Court with Chief Justice William L. Douglas. Some of you who watched the last couple of videos may recall that he ran for president against Dewey in, I think it was 1944. Almost won, but not quite. Elevating William L. Douglas to the Supreme Court is the greatest achievement and most enduring legacy of Democrats' post-war liberal supermajority. Appointed by President Eisenhower under pressure from Congress liberals, Douglas is a judicial activist and staunch progressive. As Chief Justice, he hears cases that further his liberal agenda and runs his court to diminish the influence of conservative justices. Distinct among previous Chief Justices, Douglas is overtly partisan and has faced allegations of judicial impropriety, but remains a popular figure among American liberals. Interesting indeed. Nixon's campaign against Justice Douglas will be conducted out of public view, while the White House passes along embarrassing stories of observed speaking fees and the visage of negligence. The municipal figure of the permanent hold liberals have on government will begin to waver. He's vulnerable. All that remains is to pull the trigger. So this is going to be the first of many political crises. The impeachment of Chief Justice Douglas. Now, I'm curious whether or not this is the first of many justices, or justices crises. I wonder if this one is going to be hard-coded to succeed, or if it can falter. Long story short, like they say in the background, they're working in the background, spreading nasty stories, and trying to get Bill Douglas impeached. There's an investigation going on. He says he's going to cooperate, but he kind of speaks out against the president. Buck's against Douglas will hold on only briefly, as this is a man who sat on the bench since the days of Roosevelt. As his allies across the country begin to rise in support of him, the chance will surely pass without immediate action. Utilizing relations in the House to shore support among weary Republicans, holding your own against Democrats, you'll be able to vault the first impeachment barrier. From there, the Senate is all that remains. There's no lipstick to put on the bill. You can't amend an impeachment. Therefore, to get necessary votes in the chamber, Nixon has a narrow route. Either push Lodge out there to whip the line of party-required votes, or to hold the hopeful's feet to the fire. Lyndon Johnson's quest for presidency didn't end in 1956. His aching heart couldn't kill him or his ambition. It just made him more desperate. While the public stands against Douglas, the White House can stand alongside the Senate Majority Leader. He can shore up just enough Democratic support for the impeachment to pass. Just like that, Douglas, a living monument to New Deal liberalism, judicial activism, has fallen. Okay, so let me read that real quick. So it seems like it's going to be hard-coded to fail no matter what. This one is a quite nice focus, I think. Or nice one. There's a little bit of a lot here that I'll read. Douglas is talking with Abe Fortas, trying to figure out why he's even being impeached as we're seeing the counts go through. He's asking why the read set. Fortas suggests the Damon Green case. Douglas goes, "Oh Christ, Abe, it was an unconstitutional search and seizure. That's all it was to it. I think everyone in the country wants the FBI picking through their mail the way he reacted." Uncomfortable silence. There was yay number 65. Abe broke the quiet. Maybe they do. Finally, Douglas let aside defeat escape him, just like how Nixon wanted, and the yeas have it. And then we end up having Associate Justice Joseph Chapel Hutchinson Jr. be appointed to the court. Now he's 80 years old. He's appointed to court by Woodrow Wilson. Outright explained to be a seat warmer. But there we go. Uncomfortably close to all the commotion surrounding the campaign against Douglas in the midterm elections. 2 years prior, the American people's indecisiveness resulted in a split governments being in office. 1962 won't be the Republicans year to make significant strides in unseating the permanent Democratic majority. However, it's the upper echelon of the White House's hope that decisive action could change enough minds to catch a second win ahead of the re-election campaign. The primary influence across the states during the election season is momentum. The earlier party spends to expand momentum in a state, the more races in a state a party invests in, the more tangible results will be. So that's going to be interesting. So this is, I think, the possible end of the midterms. So we can see California becomes purple. We have some seats flip there. I think some seats flip over officially in Kentucky and Indiana, making them pretty solidly red. This is all House stuff, so I can't point out a major distinction. All interesting to look at. him. Shortly after the midterm's conclusion, former First Lady, Senator, and Public Titan Eleanor Roosevelt will pass away. For legacy, she leaves unfinished work on writing the original sin of American nation. At her funeral, Nixon will watch her live from the grave, tormenting him, watching Kennedy greet Dr. King, surely scheming. For death, the civil rights issue finds new life as a new crisis emerges for Nixon to bear. This event goes over that, talking about Eleanor Roosevelt's death, as well as Dr. King and Vice President Kennedy meeting up together. One thing I want to point out is that it looks like Bobby Kennedy fills in for Miss Roosevelt. I assume there's going to be a little event for a special election, and maybe you'll be able to influence that as well. One doesn't need to look far to see the impacts the civil rights debate has already made on the country. Not only were the President and Kennedy united in unholy matrimony as a result, but South is the undeniable mover in the Senate. Neither party truly wants the issue to re-enter the public's mindset, but past a certain point, the ride in the country begins to sink. This is all civil rights stuff, and the issue being forced to the center. All interesting stuff. I'd go ahead and read it. There's stuff with George Wallace, setting him up as a major player even in the reworked America. And then here comes the culmination of deciding to do the bill. The problem with civil rights is divorce from any bill the president could sign into law. The civil rights debate is present in how millions of Americans live their day-to-day lives. As a consequence of an action escalate, evident to the rest of the Americans sitting comfortably behind their television sets, the necessity of action only grows. Here it becomes abundantly clear that the White House needs to take a formal stance on the issue. The Civil Rights Bill will pass. There will be no unexpected veto, a sudden change of heart from its sponsors, or an immediate dissipation in the activists moving it forward. Nixon cannot take a stand against the bill, looking as if he endorses racial violence, but he can't very well sign the bill and keep up his flirtations with the South. There has to be a way out, lest he end up swallowing the poison pill the liberals shove down his throat. For success, Nixon must insert himself into the movement early on, steal the thunder from any liberals, especially Kennedy, become an authority on the issue. If he can manage, he'll find another man wrestling with the same predicament. Lyndon Johnson's quest for the presidency has taken him to stranger lands. He's used to breaking bad with northern liberals like Humphrey and kissing the ring on Russell's hand next. This new bill presents with him a problem. How is he supposed to champion the legacy of Eleanor Roosevelt, being cheered on by a man like King and still plead for support of the South in '64? He can't. Working with Nixon, he'll find himself a welcome guest in the White House. Well, this is very interesting. So this is how it looks like with this, if you're doing the Kennedy stuff, if you're doing the Nixon route and you want him to maintain power and control, you can go ahead and lean with Johnson on it. It also looks like you can decide whether or not you want to help Kennedy or Thurman more, or the Northerners or Southerners more. Very, very interesting politicking going on here. And on that note, I'm gonna go ahead and leave things there. I'll get to the next part next time, where we'll wrap things up. That's gonna go over a lot of the candidates in '64, what can and can't not happen in the build up to that. It's gonna be very interesting. But I'm gonna leave things there. Thanks for watching. Like, dislike, didn't. Comments, feedback, leave in the comment section below. You all know the deal by now. Hope you all enjoyed. My name has been Mr. Dogbot333, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye-bye now.